The Black Rose McQueen. I wanted to give a shout out to Ring IQ Boxing, and remember to tune in to the motherfucking relay.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Oscar De La Hoya had this to say. He says he's hopeful the latest court ruling paves the way to get Canelo back in the ring. He was quoted as saying, "While yesterday's order does not end the case, we are hopeful that this era will allow us to reset and refocus on what's important, working together to get Canelo back in the ring against the top opponent ASAP." De La Hoya stated via social media on Saturday, perhaps with blind optimism given the fractured relationship between the two and the severity of the ongoing lawsuit. If not, we expect Canelo's lawyers will now enter arbitration as is laid out in our contract. If I'm being honest, I think that Canelo Alvarez needs to call this whole thing off. I do. I think he's made his point. I think now the people at Golden Boy Promotions and DAZN know that he means business.
He ain't fucking around.
Hall of Fame promoter Bob Arum chimed in, as many of us have already.
Me and you guys.
He says he could absolutely foresee a settlement allowing Alvarez and DAZN to continue working together.
By promising a Golovkin fight to DAZN, that justified the money DAZN was spending because that fight would have brought in about 1.5 million subscribers, many of whom would have remained with DAZN. Oscar might be arguing that Canelo's people told him they would fight Golovkin, but the difference in contracts is the whole problem. I could see a situation where DAZN ends up trying to make a new deal directly with Canelo's people, with the idea being to get Golden Boy out of there, making them pay some money. DAZN could then make a new deal with Canelo for less dollars and gain more flexibility.
In order for this kind of a scenario to come to pass, Canelo Alvarez's existing contract with Golden Boy Promotions would have to be rescinded, and in order for that to happen, he would have to establish fraud. He would have to establish that Golden Boy Promotions is in breach of the contract they have with Canelo Alvarez. Whether or not he can is anybody's guess, since Canelo Alvarez's legal team failed to adequately characterize the aforementioned parties. Golden Boy Promotions, DAZN, they characterize them as corporations, whereas they're actually limited liability companies. That's why this lawsuit hasn't moved forward yet. Though the same applies. In order for Canelo Alvarez to restructure his deal to where he's dealing with DAZN directly, as opposed to his current situation where Golden Boy Promotions operates as the middleman, the mediator between those two parties, in order for that to happen, to where Canelo's dealing directly with DAZN, they must first do away with the existing contract, the contract between Canelo and Golden Boy Promotions. Afterwards, Canelo Alvarez would be free with his team to negotiate on his own behalf directly with DAZN. Now, whether or not this is going to come to pass is anyone's guess, but this is a very bleak scenario for Golden Boy, because one of the defining characteristics of this scenario is that they would essentially be cut out of the deal. We all know that Golden Boy Promotions, and their biggest selling point when they originally struck this deal with DAZN, was they had the contract for Canelo Alvarez, the face of boxing in this part of the world. Well, what happens when Canelo don't want nothing to do with you anymore, when he's outgrown the promotional outfit and he wants to start doing things on his terms and his terms alone? What happens to Golden Boy Promotions then? Would DAZN even want to keep them around in that situation when they don't necessarily need them anymore to get at Canelo Alvarez, the face of boxing in this part of the world?
What then?
That's not a favorable scenario for Golden Boy Promotions, and that's not a favorable scenario to their stable of fighters. And for their sake, let's hope that it doesn't come to that. Let's hope that the aforementioned parties can all sit down and restructure the deal. Put simply, I think the best thing for Golden Boy Promotions to do to satisfy Canelo Alvarez, get that guy to simmer down, is to offer him a share of the company. That's assuming he doesn't have one already, and if he does, then offer him a bigger share of the company. That way, Golden Boy Promotions' success will also be Canelo Alvarez's success, and he will have the same vetted interest in the company that Oscar has, that Eric Gomez has, etc., etc. That's one possible solution that could get Canelo Alvarez more money, whilst at the same time keeping Golden Boy in the picture, preventing them from being cut out of the deal and what effects that might have, i.e., the company going under. I mean, Canelo Alvarez has been keeping these guys afloat for the most part. He's their star fighter. He's their golden goose. He's basically the reason that DAZN struck this deal with them in the first place, leveraging your star fighter, granting access to that fighter on the premise that you can stage your cards on this platform. I think that this is Canelo Alvarez's best bet to get at some of what he wants, because what he actually wants, $280 million, the remaining $280 million of his deal. You know, that money's not in a P.O. box or under a mattress.
Somewhere.
That's essentially money that Canelo hasn't even generated yet. It's money that he's guaranteed as part of an 11-fight deal, and as it stands, you haven't even fought on this platform 11 times. So what are you actually suing for? If he's upset that he wasn't able to fight in the year of 2020, well, hello, there's a global pandemic going on. The market has changed, and that's bigger than Golden Boy Promotions. That's bigger than DAZN. Some understanding and leniency, flexibility is required from Canelo Alvarez to reach a solution. Because he's essentially suing for $280 million that he hasn't even generated yet, and that's how he was going to get paid. He's suing for court costs when you're the one that decided to go to court, and he's suing for punitive damages. But what punitive damages? What are you talking about? That you didn't get to fight this year? There was a global pandemic this year. That's not Golden Boy Promotions' fault. That's not DAZN's fault. I mean, do you see a lot of guys scoring $35 million prices right about now? Or $30 million, 25, 20? Do you see a lot of guys
Right now.
getting that kind of scratch? Because if you don't, then you need to be a little bit more understanding. Moving on, I'm sure that most of you have heard already that unified light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev's fight against Arum is postponed, per ESPN's Mark Kriegel, who reports that Betterbiev suffered broken ribs during training camp. Fight to be rescheduled, hopefully, in December. This year could be a complete wash for the unified light heavyweight champion Artur Beterbiev, a skilled operator, quality operator whose career has been riddled with inactivity for one reason, some reason or another. Whether it was when he was trying to break away from Yvonne Michel for just that reason, because he wanted to fight more and he felt he wasn't getting that under that promotional banner. He makes a brief appearance on DAZN, then inks a multi-fight deal with Top Rank, but once again, he has been sidetracked. And Artur Beterbiev, he doesn't have a robust body of work. You could argue that the resume of Dmitry Bivol, the WBA's light heavyweight champion, is a more robust body of work, with more scalps, more quality scalps, than that of Artur Beterbiev's. The crown jewel of Artur Beterbiev's
CV
resume is the scalp of Alexander Vozdik, but that aside, you know, what else is really on there? There have been many sentiments expressed when it comes to a fight, a unification match between those two champions, and I've maintained my original position throughout all of those conversations that Artur Beterbiev is a quality operator, a skilled guy in more ways than one. He's not just a puncher, but at the end of the day, what he also is a guy in his mid-30s who ain't getting any younger, and he doesn't fight that much. And the longer that fight takes to make, the more it favors Dmitry Bivol. Time is a factor, folks, and time is of the essence. I'm not taking anything away from Artur Beterbiev's devastating punching power or his ability to mow a guy down. It's just a simple fact that the longer the fight takes to make, the more it favors the younger guy with the fresher reflexes and the fresher set of legs. And that guy in this situation really is Dmitry Bivol. So if these guys do end up meeting somewhere down the line, 1, 2, maybe 3 fights from now, I really do favor Dmitry Bivol to win. Artur, God bless him, is only a year younger than Sergey Kovalev, and while he hasn't been a professional boxer, as long as Sergey. He certainly doesn't have as robust a body of work and not as many career accomplishments. He still is only a year younger than that guy. That's where he is, folks. And he's sparsely active. That can't be good. 35, going on 36 years old. I'm not assigning blame, you understand. I think that Artur would have gotten out there more if it weren't for the promotional issues and the pandemic, now the thing with the broken ribs. I'm sure that Artur wants to get back to punching people in the face. It's just that circumstances seem to have often affected just how active this fighter has been over the years, and he doesn't have a whole lot of professional fights, you understand. Clock's ticking. I fear that we may have already seen the very best of Artur Beterbiev over a year ago in that Alexander Vosdik fight. I know that doesn't sound the least bit encouraging, but neither is having been out of the ring that long, and then, you're sparring, you're getting ready for a fight, and you end up breaking a couple of ribs.
And that's more time off.
It's possible that Father Time is catching up to Artur. He's in his mid-30s, and he's a very physical fighter. He's a mauler, he's a brawler. Skilled, yes, but being physical is Artur's calling card, and that kind of a style doesn't age like wine. I hate to say this, but it's possible that we actually have already seen the best we're going to see, Artur Beterbiev. And finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn has stated that November 7th is the planned date for Devin Haney's next WBC lightweight title defense. He added that Gary Russell Jr. and Yuriorkis Gamboa are the two main targets. I'll say that these really aren't the greatest options the lightweight division has to offer because, well, one of these guys is far from a fucking lightweight and the other one is past it. In truth, out of these two names, out of these two opponent options, I would rather see Devin Haney go in there with Gary Russell Jr. than Yuriorkis Gamboa, because even under these circumstances, global pandemic, travel restrictions, scarcity of opponents, available options, big names, etc., etc. Because it is true that most of the upper crust in the lightweight division here today is spoken for. Ryan Garcia is supposed to be fighting Luke Campbell. Vasil Lomachenko is supposed to be fighting Teofimo Lopez. Richard Comey, a name that was brought up by some as a good option for Devin Haney's next fight, is still coming off a loss, you understand. First round, second round knockout, whatever it was. How much credit would be given to Devin Haney if he fought Richard Comey immediately after the Teofimo Lopez knockout loss? I wager that the same guys that were criticizing before would be criticizing him thereafter. Moreover, if he decided to fight the likes of Yuriorkis Gamboa,
That's worse.
much worse and very difficult to justify. Yuriorkis Gamboa hasn't done a goddamn fucking thing since he locked horns with Gervonta Davis in Gervonta Davis's lightweight debut, and Yuriorkis did manage to go the distance with Gervonta Davis, though I don't attribute that to Yuriorkis Gamboa's durability here today. He still is, as far as I'm concerned, a shadow of his former self, and if he was able to do that with Gervonta, that has more to do with Gervonta Davis's lack of a work ethic, regression, you name it.
That's what it is.
Yuriorkis Gamboa is not a solid choice, is not a solid opponent for Devin Haney in November. Before you give me Yuriorkis Gamboa, I'll take Gary Russell Jr. Comes to Gary, I question how much credit you could give Devin Haney for fighting that guy. I mean, this is a guy who would essentially be jumping up 2 weight classes for that fight. But the difference between Gary and Yuriorkis Gamboa is that Gary has made himself quite the nuisance the last couple of weeks with the constant video call-outs, taunts, stories circulating about this guy. Stories that we now know Team Gary Russell Jr. paid certain YouTube authors to spread around. I've no doubts as to keep his name in circulation at a time where he really didn't have a heck of a lot going on. Before you give me a shot to shit Yuriorkis Gamboa, I'll take a loudmouth Gary Russell Jr. And not because he's some kind of a big scout,
But because he needs to shut the fuck up.
I would like to see someone shut him the fuck up, and that someone could be Devin Haney in November. We've broached this subject several times already in the past, that I approach it with a grain of salt, with some skepticism as to whether one or both aforementioned parties actually want to make this fight. But the fact that Eddie Hearn is suggesting that Gary Russell is in the running for a November matchup with Devin leads me to believe that perhaps the Devin Haney side of things is serious. They're making real inquiries to see this fight get made. These are hard inquiries, whereas maybe it's the Russell Jr. side of things that doesn't really want this fight. Maybe they're the ones that are dragging their feet and just using this as an opportunity to get some free publicity. Keep his name out there because he doesn't have much else going on, and if they don't keep his name out there, people will forget about him. He already only fights once a year. A sparse schedule of activity is why Gary Russell Jr. finds himself in this situation to where he's the longest reigning active champion in boxing today, yet he has almost no marquee value. The guys on his side of the street, they don't even prioritize fighting this fucking guy. And Gary Russell Jr. has claimed that he's not pinned down to being on that side of the street, that he's a network and promotional free agent. He can go where he wants to go, yet he hasn't seemed to have gone anywhere else. I understand that this particular set of negotiations could be used as an example of what Gary Russell Jr. is talking about, but this fight isn't actually finalized, is it? And some of Gary Russell Jr.'s recent comments could be interpreted as Gary dragging his feet, potentially sabotaging the fight. I mean, it shouldn't be this difficult to make a fight between these two guys when neither one of them has anything going on. And while Devin Haney is a matchroom fighter, Gary's a network and promotional free agent. Shouldn't even matter to Gary. Going here, going there, or going anywhere. For the first or second fighters, Gary Russell Jr. seems to want some say-so over where a potential rematch with Devin would take place. I don't see why that would be important to a network and promotional free agent. You ain't got to deal with Fox. You ain't got to deal with Showtime. You say you're not a PBC fighter, that you just do business with them. You're not pinned down to that situation. So why the fuck would you care where the rematch takes place?
He's just trying to make things difficult.
That's my interpretation of it. This is just Gary scrambling for sticking points that could potentially stifle this set of negotiations. I'm not convinced that Gary Russell Jr. is being serious about making this fight. I'm just not. Maybe the Haneys are, maybe Eddie Hearn and Matchroom are, but Gary, for all I know, Gary's just using this as a means to get some publicity, get some articles written about him, because he doesn't have anything going on, and if he doesn't make some kind of news, people will forget who he is, further hampering his marquee value, the lack thereof. We'll see what happens with this thing, but I reiterate, out of these two choices, I'd rather see Devin Haney shut Gary Russell the fuck up than batter an over-the-hill Yuriorkis Gamboa.